Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go. Hello.
Hey.
It feels like 8 million years since we did one of these.
A Dear Krachel?
Yeah, it's only been a month, but it feels like 8 million
Hasn't been
years.
any longer than usual.
I'm telling you, it feels like 8 million years. Whenever I make up a number, it almost always has 8 in it, by the way.
I do too. I say 8 or 18.
But that's my birthday, is 8/18.
That's weird.
Well, it just confirms what we all knew. Is that
Like I always say 18 million.
You secretly really do
when I'm
love
trying
me.
to say a lot.
Yeah, it's about me, clearly.
I guess that's the only answer.
You secretly love me. That's what this is really about.
I guess maybe that's
and I love
it.
myself. So that theory checks out. Well, for those of you who might be new to the podcast and haven't listened to many episodes, if you don't know what Dear Krachel is a very unfortunate portmanteau of our names.
That we did not choose. It was put onto us, and we have just decided to embrace it instead of fight it.
Don't nickname yourselves. Only D-bags do that. If you're given a nickname, that's okay. Can you
And this one was bestowed onto us.
So every month we answer 2 to 4, usually 3 questions from listeners. If you ever want to submit one, there's always in every show notes of every episode, literally every episode of the podcast, you can click over and get more details. And at the bottom, there'll always be a link to the form where you can fill out a Dear Krachel question. And you can also, if you're on the go and you don't want to find that form and you have a thought or a conundrum and you want to share it, you can just pull up your email and send it to contact@clarityonfire.com. Just make sure the subject says Dear Krachel and we'll figure it out. But if you ever want to submit a question about anything, life, career, relationships, existential angst, friendships, I don't know, your dog, sure, why not? I'll answer questions about your dog as long as they're not medical. I'll answer those.
I mean, we don't know that much about dogs, but sure.
Just saying, what if their dog is involved in some sort of an emotional drama?
Sure, anything goes.
I feel like my dog's been involved in plenty of emotional dramas.
She has her own running emotional drama all the time.
So anything that, falls under the umbrella of life that you need some feedback on from 2 certified life and career coaches, we will consider answering your question. So we have got 3 today. Let us dive in to the first one. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. Sorry, guys. I almost lost my notes. All right. Dear Krachel, before I get to my question, I want to thank you. This time last year, I was in a toxic job where I was literally crying in the bathroom several times a week and thought it was normal. I made my word of the year for 2019 clarity because, oh man, did I need some. And one Google search later, I found you. I'm now in a new job. I enjoy coming to work every day. We have fantastic bosses and an office dog.
See, already dogs are coming into play.
Haha. Also, I can hear my dog breathing under the door of like a creeper while we do this. And the last time I cried was due to physical pain and nothing at all to do with crazy people. There were many factors that fed this change, but thank you for being a very influential piece of that puzzle. That's really nice.
So nice.
And now to my question. I was so excited when you started talking about the Enneagram. I'm a big fan and I've identified as a 5 since I took the test 2 years ago. Your episodes were amazing, but they've led me to an identity crisis. I realized that while I identify with several parts of the 5, being a thoughtful observer, sometimes standoffish, having a love of learning and books, I've never really connected to the core messages and fears of the 5. So I thought maybe I really did have those fears and dreams, but they were hidden deep down. So I ignored it and kept on 5ing it up. Then I listened to you talking about what it is to be a 9, and suddenly my gut was screaming, this is you. So I retook it, and spoiler alert, I'm a 9. Is this a thing? Can someone's type change? Did I mistype myself from the first time around? It's a weird thing to freak out about, but I like to know these things, and having such a sudden shift feels unsettling. I know 100% I'm an INFJ Ravenclaw tribe member. Why can't my Enneagram type play nicely too? Signed, Muddled Muggle.
I love that name. We're going to call you Muggle. Okay. So I have a few thoughts about this. First of all, what I do know about any kind of personality assessment is the more self-aware you become, the better you get at answering the questions in a more deeply honest way, and the more accurate your results are going to be. So if you've become more self-aware over the years since you took it originally and got 5, and you're answering the questions more from that place of, ooh, what are my deeper fears and what are those core messages? You're going to get something that is going to resonate much more deeply. And so that might be part of it right off the bat.
Yeah, I don't think that you should worry that you just made a sudden shift in personality. You didn't.
Well, you said you never actually related to those core fears and messages from the 5 anyway.
So my theory is that those tests are notoriously hard to take. And if you interpret certain questions differently, and you really can, based on your mood that day, just based on what it brings up for you in that moment, then you can answer the question slightly differently and end up with very different results. So even in the Enneagram book, they tell you that the tests aren't the thing that you should be taking at face value. It's absolutely your reaction to reading about each type or hearing about each type. That's how you know for sure what your type is. So the fact that you had this like gut punch level realization around 9 means that's definitely your type. Now, when I read your question, what I thought was particularly interesting was that the things you said you related to about being a type 9 were being a thoughtful observer, being a 5, being a thoughtful observer, sometimes standoffish, having a love of learning and books. I know those were just like the few things that you pulled as an example, but those are all very much sort of like the outward characteristics of a 5, sort of like the stereotypical picture of a 5. And I think that where you may have gone a little bit wrong, and I'm glad you're bringing this up because for other people this will be helpful too, is the Enneagram is not something you can characterize or type by outward identification whatsoever. Just because someone looks like or even acts like what you think their type should be does not mean that that's what their deep fears or motivators are. And that's really what the Enneagram is about. It's about your core desires. It's about your deepest fears. It's about your motivations as a person. And those are invisible to the naked eye. And so sometimes it's easier to type ourselves based on what something looks like rather than something very intangible like your core motivations.
Right. Which is why, again, that gut instinct when you hear about them is going to be much more telling because that's an internal response versus outward characteristics. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, too, no one is just one type. Yeah. Everyone is on a spectrum from all of the types. So there's a very good chance that while it sounds like you're a primary 9, you might still have a high amount of 5 in your Enneagram chart. The more official test actually breaks down by percentage what percentage of the total you are of each of those levels. So maybe 5 is higher up on your chart. And that would be why you relate to some of the characteristics, but not all of them. Mm-hmm. So you can be a 9/5 if you want to.
Yeah, you can be a 9, 5, 3, 1, 8, 7, 4, 2. Did I leave anything out?
I don't know.
6? Yep, I left out 6. So it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Trust your gut. Your gut is right. I don't want you to second guess yourself because that gut reaction is totally spot on.
Which means that your Enneagram type is playing nice. You're a 9. You might be others as well, in addition.
Yeah.
But you are a primary 9.
I think it's more just you leaned probably too much on what the test results said. And those are very, very fallible. I honestly don't think they're that much more accurate than like a lie detector test, to be honest, because I've seen so many people take it now and get kind of like mixed results. And so it depends on what test you took, depends on how accurate that test is, depends on how you were feeling that day, which is why the best indicator is your reaction to reading about each of the types. And so for those of you who are like, what the heck is the Enneagram? Please go back to August 23rd and August 30th. We had a 2-part bonus book club series about the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram. You don't have to read the book at all.
We give you such a good deep dive into it. That's why we had to take 2 episodes because we get really pretty specific. So yeah, you don't have to read the book. You can go get a really good overview of the types. If you want to take one of the assessments, before you listen, that's fine too. But you also will hear us talk about them and very likely get a sense of which one resonates most with you.
I'll link to those episodes. Again, you can just scroll back to the end of August and find part 1 and part 2 of that series. And then in the show notes of those episodes, we have links to the various tests that you could take. There's a free version and a $12 paid version if you're interested. Kristen and I really, really like the Enneagram, and we only discovered it like earlier this year. But I'm incorporating it a lot more into coaching because I find that it is so helpful for people to have that sort of basic understanding and like archetype of their fears and motivations. It works very well to kind of create some, I wouldn't say shortcuts, but like it almost like gives you a shortcut to the core of the deepest wounds and problems for people.
Well, and it helps me as a coach to get a sense of what some of those are as well. It's just a little bit of a streamlining process to figure some of that out. So it's good. It's good insight into yourself, and it's good insight for us into you.
Okay, on to the next question.
Question 2. Dear Krachel, I've realized I'm having a hard time entering a relationship because my views on men are distorted. I just don't understand them. And I somehow got this belief that they are totally different from women and that men just don't understand women. I think it's also how I've seen men and women portrayed in the media, too, when I was growing up. Also, my upbringing with my father wasn't too great either. So how can I change my distorted beliefs about men? Thanks. That is from LaLa.
Can I go off for a second?
Sure.
Okay. So I have a real bone to pick with 2 very different subsets of thinking. Okay. One is toxic masculinity, toxic femininity. Think like 1950s situation where, you know, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I know that book was written probably in the 80s, but you get what I'm saying. That very like, they are so different and they're so incomprehensible. And like, you know, women have to wear feather boas and be girly, and men have to be like, never have feelings. And I know I'm not doing a good job of ranting about this, but I'm just telling you what's on my mind right now. And that ain't great. Like, I want to toss out the model that says women have to be one thing and men have to be another, and they're so different, and ne'er shall the 2 paths cross. That ain't cool.
Nope.
Here's where a lot of us are, and I see a lot of my clients here, and I see us here as a culture, and I ain't down with it, okay? Is that we've swung so far in a fear of being toxic that we've gotten to the place where people have to all be the same. And I find that just as toxic. That like, now you have to be like 50% masculine, 50% feminine, and everyone has to be that. Or else, like, somehow you're not being a feminist, or somehow men aren't being, I don't know, feminine enough, or we're not being masculine enough, whatever. It's bothersome. So what I want is I want there to be a nuanced conversation about the fact that at our core, humans all have a lot of the same fears and drivers and motivations and desires, and that there are certain things that we absolutely need to have in common, and that especially for men, because she has distorted beliefs about men, they have been even more warped when it comes to experiencing their feelings and rumbling with things like vulnerability and shame. They have been even more than so than women shamed out of having feelings. So that's a big problem. And I do absolutely believe that, like, we need to get closer in terms of that, in terms of like, we can all feel comfortable sharing difficult emotions and feelings and human things.
That's a thing that all humans share. That is not a man or woman thing. We all have feelings. We all have emotional reactions to life circumstances.
And I also want to leave room for the fact that there are absolutely differences between in some ways, men and women and all types of people are wired differently, just based on all kinds of factors. Right.
And that's okay.
Yes.
And you don't have to lean so hard into it that you are so opposite that you have nothing that you can relate to, because there's a lot that we can all relate to. Or that you have to have
everything in common, or else something is wrong.
Exactly. Yes. So there can be a lot of complementary characteristics of different types of people. And that includes gender, but it includes a lot of other factors as well.
So that said, how does one start healing distorted views that they have, probably outdated, distorted views that you have about men? Because guess what? I bet you're looking left and right and you're finding a lot of confirmation that we are super different. That there are some men that you're looking at who are very unevolved, or might be a little bit more caveman-esque. Or, you know, hello, the Me Too movement hasn't exactly been a good look for a lot of men, for example. Right. So I can tell if you're looking for evidence that we're different, you're going to find it.
And I don't know that you're even consciously looking for it. I think that's just been such a major part of your paradigm. And you described that's actually really normal. A lot of people grow up with distorted views about all different types of people. And again, that could be gender, that could be any number of factors. And so it makes a lot of sense where you got these from. And I think it's very self-aware and very evolved of you to want to work through this. So I give you a lot of kudos for even acknowledging this about yourself and reaching out to say, how can I start to shift this? Because I want a healthier view of men. And because of the experiences that you have had and the experience that you have witnessed when it comes to men and women's relationships, you're going to have to very consciously seek out examples of different types of men who do not fit your paradigm. Because most of the time, we are looking for confirmation of what we already believe. Unconsciously, we're always doing this all of the time.
Our brain is just wired to do that.
And so it is going to take a lot of intentionality for you to say, I want to find men who break my mold. Yeah. And whether you know them personally, whether these are celebrities, whether these are friends of friends, whether this is the husband of a second cousin removed, I don't care who these people are or if you will ever have any contact with them, but to find some of those examples and to build a little bit of a case study almost of different types of men. I don't care if they're fictional for that matter. I think that
I got a nice laundry list of the kind of men I'm liking and looking for.
But if you don't try to do that, you're going to just keep finding examples of the same old thing, the same old pattern.
So I think it's helpful to ask you, LaLa, just to think about what would I like to prove wrong?
What are the qualities I would like to discover in men and maybe also in women? Because if you're thinking those things about men, then there's a dynamic that's going on between men and women. And so that's probably also affecting your perception of women to some degree.
It's been very helpful for me because I have this skewed perception that in order to find a man who is capable of doing the work, like with a capital TW, the work. And by that, I mean, is emotionally available, is capable of rumbling with things like vulnerability and shame. And
is good at asking questions and like looking inward.
Is open-minded and self-aware. Yes. That they also have to be like a willowy little piece who has a top knot and goes to Bali retreats, which is, if that is what you're into, like if you want to get down and dirty, quite, literally with that, like, please, by all means. I gotta say that isn't my style. I'm a little bit more of like a woke lumberjack is what I'm looking for. So I've had to look for examples of that. So like I've had to put like The Rock. Could there be a woker lumberjack? Right. I mean, not that I'm actually that physically into him because that's like almost too much. Yeah, but he's a great example of a very, very evolved, aware, like emotionally astute man who's also very manly. Like he has a lot of masculine energy, but in a healthy way. He's not a toxic like, masculine type at all. And I've like made like Nick Offerman, again, not super physically into him, but I love him and Megan Mullally's relationship. And I think it's like a really good pinnacle of what like a masculine feminine relationship can be like. That's very equal, but also they're each like in their own roles in this very beautiful yin yang relationship.
Well, and I'm glad you said you gave an example because I do want LaLa to find examples, particularly of men, but also of relationships, because that's a big part of why she's even asking this question. She wants to get into a healthy relationship. And so first, I think you've got to write out the characteristics. What are the things that I'm looking for that I'm not sure exist in men or in healthy relationships? I want them to exist, but I'm not convinced they do. And then I want you to go out and seek out examples of that, even if it takes you a little while to find some good examples.
Keep a running list. I do.
Yep. Keep a running list and keep looking for more and more to add to that list. And I guarantee you, once you start to shift your attention, it's like when you buy a new car. Like when I just last year bought a black Honda CRV. Everywhere I went, I saw black Honda CRVs. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of them, but also I was just seeing them because I was so attuned to them. So I want you to shift your attention as if you just bought a car and now you see everyone driving the same car. Shift your attention to who you want to find, like man-wise, and then you'll start to see them.
Do you remember when I thought it was you, but I stood on a corner and I thought you were driving past me, and I was walking the dog, and I thought it was you, and I stood and I waved like I was the queen because I thought it was funny. And then this girl drove past me. It was not you.
Well, I don't remember this because
crazy,
I wasn't there.
but I told you about it. And I waved like the queen and I stood really still and like I thought it was hilarious. Except this poor girl looked at me like I was insane.
I mean, she probably thought you were insane.
And speaking of the queen, you know who else is on my list is Prince William and Prince Harry.
Oh yeah,
they're
such
great examples of like, and like they've been through hardship because they lost their mother, and I think they went to a lot of therapy, and they've really like cultivated the ability to be in a healthy relationship. You can tell that just by the quality of the relationships and the women that they've attracted into their lives. So again, just as people, but as relationships too, I think that they're really excellent examples for me that I've put on my list. So. Have that writing list, LaLa.
If you need a good fictional example, then Jamie Fraser from Outlander.
Ooh, honey,
Jamie
you can't
and
do
Claire.
better than that.
I mean, that's the pinnacle for us all
really
to be striving for.
I mean, get you one of them. I mean, I'm still in it. I'm in it to win it. That or nothing, basically.
So we've given you a lot of examples to start with.
But one more thing I want to introduce you to, LaLa, is a woman named Allison Armstrong. I will link to her site. It's actually understandmen.com. I think it's probably also AllisonArmstrong.com. It leads you to the same place. Allison has been researching the dynamics between men and women for 30 years. And I think she's about 60 now. I mean, like she's been doing this half her life. And she has a really interesting perspective based on her research and based on her coaching and all of the things she's been doing for so long about the differences between us, the similarities between us, and how to talk to and connect with and understand the other person that you're in a relationship with, or just generally, like men in general.
Yes.
She has some great like audio workshops that you can download and learn more.
A lot of them are on Audible, if you're an Audible person. She has a lot of, and maybe other places too. But what I really like about her is she does acknowledge that, there are some differences.
There's some major differences.
There's some differences in just how we process information and how we process emotions. And some of that might be biological. Some of that might be societal. But the fact is it's just kind of how we are at this stage of humanity. And in order to have the best, healthiest relationships with people of the other gender, regardless if it's romantic or professional or familial or whatever, it really, really helps to understand their view of the world and their way of processing things so that you're not speaking different languages. So there are some differences, but there's a lot of similarities between people too.
One of the things that she says is that women make the mistake of assuming that men are supposed to think and behave like hairy women. And men are not hairy women. Men are men. And there are some healthy things about that for them. And to not expect them to be women is one of the actually kindest things we can do, and learn how to communicate so that we can have, again, like that really healthy yin-yang relationship where it doesn't have to be 50-50. It can be, I go 80% of the way on this thing, you go 80% of the way on that thing, but we balance each other out in a really healthy, like synergistic kind of way. And so she has a really interesting take. She is more of a baby boomer, like I guess like elder Gen X, early baby boomer type. So for millennials, her approach can get a little corny.
I don't know if it's an age thing or just like the way she writes. The way she writes is a little bit, she writes some of her books as if it's a story. And the story is a little corny. But
Keys to the Kingdom and the Queen's Code they're really great books, even though they're corny AF.
Yeah, exactly. The stories are corny. Just know that going in. But the content and what you actually learn in them is invaluable.
I can't tell you how many clients I've had read the Queen's Code, and it totally transformed their relationships. I had one who was like kind of on the brink of, I don't know if we're going to make it. And like a year later, she's married and has a baby with this guy. Yeah. And it's just...
Allison Armstrong has saved a lot of marriages. Yeah, and also really probably prevented the wrong marriages. I mean, she's just like really helped you figure out how to be healthy in relationships. So she's a really good resource.
I'll link to her. So, okay. Last question. All right. Dear Krachel, I left my job a couple of months ago with a plan to move abroad. Sadly, though, those plans to move have been put on hold until early next year, and I'm currently unemployed. It's been nice having the time to reflect and explore, but I also get a mini heart attack when bills come. Since I'm aiming to leave the US in March, it seems to me that my only option is to do some temp work to pay the rent. I doubt somebody would hire me knowing I plan to leave in a few months. But looking only for temp work also feels almost like I could be missing out on some bigger, more fulfilling opportunities. Do you think temp work is my main, most solid option for the coming months? Or are there other reasonable possibilities that would allow me to still plan on moving without waiting months and spending all of my savings? Thank you so, so much. I've been eating up all the Clarity on Fire content lately and always. Laura.
Really good question. I know Laura's question might seem kind of specific. Not everyone's going to be moving abroad in a few months, but there are plenty of people who might be in between jobs or who might be waiting for something to change in their lives before they're ready to get into a new career situation. And so I think it's actually more common than you might think to have several months in between now and when you want to be working more full time. And so because of that, I think this is a really, really valuable question. I have more options for you than just temp work, Laura. And I'm sure I don't even know anywhere close to all the options.
We're not clearly experts on
Exactly. But right off the bat, I'm thinking of an interview I did with a normal person. I forget exactly when that was. It was with Francine Menz. And we'll link to that one. And she is a really good example of someone who became a digital nomad and was working in multiple different countries, just doing all remote work where they didn't care where she was physically or geographically. And so I don't know if you have a job already lined up when you move abroad and if you're just looking strictly for temporary work. But if not, you might be able to find a more long-term job that can go with you no matter where you are in the world. So that's one thing to be thinking of right off the bat is you don't have to wait for long-term work necessarily. A lot is remote now.
That episode with Francine was in early September.
I saw your eyes look in the back of your head trying to figure out the date.
I can always figure out when they were. Yeah.
I'm also thinking there are people who go on maternity leave or paternity leave. And there might be people who absolutely want someone to come in just for 3 or 4 months until someone comes back and takes their job. I mean, like, there's a lot.
There's contract work.
There's contract work. We're in the gig economy. You can sign up for just about any part-time service.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's just a lot of choices if that's the route you want to go. And if not, you can start looking for longer term things now, as long as they can follow you around.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, that would help with your freedom, I would imagine. And I think the reason I wanted to answer this question was, again, not because it's specific to everyone's situation, but because there are aspects of it that I think are universal. And one of those big questions is is it okay if I quit a job after 4 months? Like, what happens if I really need some sort of stopgap measure? I need a bridge thing, but I feel guilty because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be there in 4 or 5 months. Like, what are the moral implications and ethical implications, just to bore the shit out of you at the end of this episode, of something like that? And I got to say, obviously, I'm not down for you just applying for any old job and knowing you're going to be bouncing after 4 months. I don't think that that's okay to do necessarily. But I also think that you got to look out for yourself. And so if it's more of like if it's a higher turnover job where the expectation kind of is like, well, we can't keep people for that long. I bet you Starbucks has a pretty high turnover. I bet most retail places have a pretty high turnover. Grocery stores, like those types of places where you can kind of retail, you can get in and get out. I think if you have to do that, like, yes, obviously you might feel a little bit guilty about taking up their time or them training you. And I wouldn't recommend doing that if you feel like there's other better options. But sometimes you also just got to look out for yourself and you've got to make money. And I think that to an extent, I don't want people to like prevent themselves from doing what they need to do to take care of themselves because they're afraid of displeasing people.
Right. And this is a bit of an intuitive thing. I mean, if you're genuinely going to be leaving people in a lurch, if they're bringing on a new team manager and in 4 months, you leave the team without a manager.
Right.
That's a bit of a different, I would feel very uncomfortable with that. Something where they're just looking for someone in there to do the work. And in 4 months, when you're ready to go, someone else could come in and do the same work. Then that's, to me, like a perfectly valid thing for you to sign up to do in the meantime.
Yeah.
Whether or not you share your exact departure date with them.
Also, let me say this, that life can change. And so sometimes you take a job full well intending to be gone in 4 months, but maybe your timeline gets pushed back. So it's not that I don't want you to plan for, the plan that you've already put together to work out. It's just that no one can ever really predict the future. So it's okay if you take something and you're like, I think I'm going to leave. And like, it's good that I have this in case something else happens or in case this timeline gets pushed back, because timelines get pushed back all the time.
Yep.
That's what happens in life.
And for some people, and this may or may not be relevant to Laura, but I want to put out there as another option, you could do some freelancing work. I mean, if you can write a resume, if you can edit things, if you can do some
you can get on one of those sites like Upwork or something.
Exactly. There's a lot of things where you can control how much or how little you work and what skills you bring to the table. There's just so many more options of making money now than there have been really ever.
Yeah. I just had a client quit her job because it was god awful. But she, solely providing for herself, and she's living in a very expensive city. And so it wasn't like she had the luxury to just sit around for months on end and hope that the perfect job landed in her lap. So she basically reached out to her whole network and was like, I'm looking for something maybe temporary. And within like a week or two, she had a contract job that was lasting 6 to 8 weeks. And that's it, 6 to 8 weeks of a contract. And she's getting paid not as well as she would have at her job, but hey, she's not yet having to go work at the mall, and she's making enough money to cover her basic needs while she's focusing on the longer term. So work your network if you need to.
I've had clients now, mostly they were Canadian because they have so much better parental leave policy. But I've had multiple Canadian clients who took on about a year-long commitment, maybe not even sometimes for maternity or paternity leave.
Yeah.
And so there are people who only want temporary work. You might have to ask around, or you might have to pull it together yourself, but you don't have to sit around and wait to move abroad with no money coming in if that's stressing you out the way it is.
Girl, go get that money.
It's a lot of choices.
Okay, so, and of course, when Laura sent this, that was like back in September, and so now it's November 1st. So Laura probably already figured this out. So I hope that maybe our answer just validated whatever she chose to do. But we would like to hear from you, Laura, if you want to give us an update. And LaLa and Muddled Muggle. We want to hear from all of you or anyone who we've answered a question from in the past.
Yeah, so, we love to get updates. We love to hear how one person's question might have related to someone else who had the same question and didn't even know it until someone else asked it for them. We love to hear all of your thoughts.
So once again, check the link to the episode description so that you can see all of the things we've mentioned and linked to, episodes and Allison Armstrong and all of that. I will make sure that I write down all the things I'm supposed to mention so that by the time this episode goes live, I won't have forgotten anything. Okay, one last thing I want to say before we wrap this episode up is that I decided if we're going to do book club episodes, let's tell people in advance what book we're going to read so that they can read it if they want to and join us. And not that you have to ever read a book because we'll tell you what we read, but we are doing a book club episode at the end of this month because there are 5 Fridays in this month. So we will be doing a new book. And the book we're doing this month is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, who is a therapist.
Yeah. So this one, you've maybe heard of this one. This one's been
very popular.
Yeah. Very much in the conversation lately.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to give our take.
It's a nonfiction book about this therapist, Lori, who goes through a sudden breakup and then goes to therapy herself. So it's about her story in therapy, but it's also about a handful of her very interesting clients and their unique situations and her experience giving them therapy and their progress in therapy.
Yeah, it's really cool to see a therapist be a therapist and then a therapist be a client of a therapist. And it just really takes you on the inner journey of a lot of different types of people. And it's really fascinating. So we're going to get into that later this month, at the end of this month.
Yeah, so check it out on Audible if you want, or not that I'm getting sponsored.
I know, we keep bringing up Audible.
But I love Audible. If they want to sponsor me, I would be down.
Thing.
But listen to it or read it if you want. And if not, that's fine. You can tune in and we'll give you basically the Cliff Notes version of, well, exactly, it'll still be like an hour-long conversation because we can't do anything short. But it'll be shorter than listening to it on Audible. So if you want a little book to read, go check that out. And we will see you on Tuesday.
With a blog.
From you, I think.
I think that's right.
All right. See you then.
Bye.